We're in Psalm 55. I'm going to read this in chunks as we get into the Word. But one of the specific ways I think that the world will view the church and judge the church, one of the specific ways where the world will look at the church and make the judgment. Are these legitimate people? Do they really stand up for what they believe in? Are they hypocritical by nature? Are these people for real? Well, one of the ways the world will decide that is by how we respond when we're wronged. How do we respond, more specifically, to something like betrayal? How do we as a church respond? If you want to think on a macro level, socially speaking, how does the church respond when we're wronged? How do you respond when you are wronged? When someone you love, because it's always someone you love, right? Someone you love betrays you. Someone you love hurts you. Someone you love betrays you. I think it kind of boils down to two things. One way to put it would be fight or flight. Fight or flight. That's kind of the expression, right? Do you fight or do you flight? Well, if you're like, okay, what is fight? Well, then the fight would be, to fight is to retaliate. It's to take revenge. It's to take vengeance against that person that betrayed you. Now, if you're like, well, I'm a Christian, I don't retaliate, I don't take revenge, right? It's not something I do. It's not in my nature. I'm a better person than that. Okay, honestly, I think to a very large extent I can believe that, because when I look at you all fine people, you're good people. I don't think you're out there to get each other, even when you're betrayed against. I don't think Julie's going to go to Karen and be like, you and me, parking lot, 4 p.m., come alone. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to beat you down. That's not going to happen. We don't physically retaliate or take that I know of. I mean, unless everyone takes revengeance and I'm completely naive of it, right? We're just not that kind of people. But if we're going to be honest, and we're going to look at it through the Christian perspective, I think, yes, we don't do stuff like that, but I think there are Christian ways of retaliation. It's called gossip. It's called division. It's subtly getting people on your side so that your goal is to take the majority of the church on your side so that they can oust the person who betrayed you and passive-aggressively turn it around so that they are now the most wicked people on the planet. And there are thousands of subtle but powerful ways that we do that. That's flight. That's fight. Okay, so then what is flight? Well, to flight then is to avoid. And again, right? Okay, so I'm a Christian, okay? And someone just hurt me, someone just betrayed me. I know I'm supposed to forgive. I know what the Bible says, right? I know what the gospel is. But whatever. I mean, that was the last straw. If you betrayed me, then that's it. No second chances for you. I will forgive you, but it's going to take me about 43 years. So give me I need my space. Okay, give me a few decades, right? That's what we say. And so that's like flight. And the fear in this, now listen to me, the fear in this is so that you don't get hurt. The whole process in this is setting up walls. It's your defense mechanism so that you set yourself up so that you don't get hurt. And so what you're doing is you're creating this huge moat around you. It's this deserted island. You're setting up your own personal system and structure so that no one can hurt you anymore. You're not cutting them out of your life, but they are definitely far from you. You don't trust them. They don't trust you. Then at least you're protected. Then at least you don't get hurt. And you know what? When you're on your deserted island, the first few seasons in your life, it's nice. You don't have to worry about people. Just take care of yourself. No one's going to hurt you. No one's going to do anything to bother you. You don't have to risk getting to know people and all that stuff. But then a few seasons go by, and then you find yourself abandoned. And you find yourself lonely. And you find yourself that it's really hard to get back into community. And so you just kind of give up. And if push comes to shove, that's when we go, it's time to find another church. It's so much easier just to find another church. Go, be the visitor, take like 8 months to get to know people, and then I can decide if I want to be a member there. It's just so much easier that way. You see, that's flight. Maybe for some of you, flight is really just about walking away from the whole thing. No confrontation, no kind of discussion, no prayer, just walk away from it. You know, a while back, a guy on the Lakers, I think I'm saying this wrong. Contavious? Am I saying that right? Sounds like an adjective. I don't know. I contagiously conspired to kill him. I don't know. Contavious, he got in a scuffle with someone from the Suns. You guys remember that? And so what happens is he got in this little scuffle, right? And when that happens because sports teams, it's a different ball game, right? Pun. Sports teams is a different ball game. And so what happens is you don't go, hey, forgive each other. You don't do that. You back each other up, right? So all the bench is clear. And so this guy's in a scuffle, and you know what Lonzo Ball does? The hotshot rookie? He straight up walks away from the whole thing, right? And it's not even subtle. Like it's straight up. It's the most obvious walk away. He walks away from his teammates. And when I saw that, I was like, wow. Talk about maturity, right? He knows what he's doing. Like he doesn't want to get involved. And in post-game interview, right, he's like, I'm not trying to get a tech, right? He's all trying to be this big-time mature guy. And then I find out his teammates got in his case like crazy, and especially his coach. And they're like, you don't ever leave your teammates. Even at the expense of you getting a tech, then get the stinking tech then. You don't leave your teammates behind. And I thought about that, and I agree. Even if you have to get stung a little bit, even at your own personal expense, you don't walk away from the fight. There needs to be confidence. And I'm not saying when there's a scuffle you should fight. That's not what I'm saying. Okay? I'm saying resist that urge to fight. That's what I'm saying. I think that's our response a lot as Korean Americans today in the church. Passive aggressively trying to fight it when really we're acting like everything's okay, but really it's not. And we walk away from it. And so I think, like, even on my Instagram, I get so many little quotes and so many little things that say, cut out the negativity in your life. You guys get that stuff? I should stop following some of this stuff, but like, cut out the negativity in your life, right? I know, just delete it. Why is it so hard, right? I ain't got time for negative people. It's always ghetto people too, right? I ain't got time for negative people, right? It's negativity, cut it out. And it's like this movement towards positive change. And there's even like prosperity preachers out there who will say like, surround yourself with positive people. You don't need to be around negative people. And you think, well, wow, that's genius. I should just cut out all the negative people, negative energy, right? All that stuff, I just cut it out. If you really buy into that kind of wisdom, and you really understand what that means, then why go on missions? You're rich, educated Americans. Why go to a third world country and serve people who are going to give you nothing in return? Why do small group? Why go to a group of negativity where people come and cry and complain about their problems? Why seek out reconciliation, restoration in the community? Just go after what is good for you. If you want to apply gospel in this, why in the world would Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, in his perfect holiness and all his majesty of the Trinity, light coming down into a jacked up darkness and world and die? Cut out the negativity. That is complete anti-gospel. You don't walk away from that. Now, wherever you are on that spectrum of responses, fight or flight, there's a lot of unhealthy things that surface. When you're pushed to the point where someone has hurt you, when you are betrayed against, do we just throw all our theology, our affection for Jesus out the window, and we just go, I'm going to do what I need to do? Now, I think I need to bring something up here, because a point that we have to understand, and maybe you don't think that this is relevant to you because you just think that like everything seems to be working out in your life. I hate to burst your bubble, but betrayal happens. Betrayal happens. And when betrayal happens, it happens from the people you love and you trust the most. That is the world of reality that we live in. I cannot change that. You cannot change that. Betrayal doesn't happen from acquaintances. It happens from people we love. And so that's when push comes to shove, and you really have to start considering, how am I going to respond when something like that happens? It could be family. Some of you, I think I know some of your stories, some of your own parents have betrayed you. And the church doesn't teach you how to process through that. Some of your closest friends have betrayed you. I mean, maybe your small group members or leaders have betrayed you. Maybe the church has hurt you or betrayed you. Maybe you feel like I betrayed you somehow. Maybe I'm not even aware of it. In this psalm, David writes about his betrayal. He's opening up his personal journal. This isn't a theological letter. This isn't a gospel narrative. This is like David's pouring out his soul, his process of spiritual formation. He's opening up his journal and he's showing to you, this is how I'm processing my betrayal. And there's a process in that. Now, I want you to jump to verse 12. And David is going to tell us who betrayed him. It's shocking, okay? This is like Jerry Springer shocking, okay? Verse 12, for it is not an enemy who taunts me. Okay? Not an enemy. Then I could bear it. It is not an adversary who deals insolently with me. Then I could hide from it. Right? That's flight. Right? Running away from it. Verse 13, but it is you, a man, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend, my BFF, my homie, my small group, my brother, you who grew up on the block next to me, it's you. That's what he's saying. Verse 14, we used to take sweet counsel together. Within God's house, we walked in the throng. This guy would walk inside the church and they would small group together. They trusted each other to the extent that they would speak truth into each other's lives. Hey, you got to watch this tendency, man. I've been observing you. I don't think this is healthy for you. And he would say, you know what, you're right. Pray for me. Help me in that. Hold me accountable to that. And they would walk in season and out of season, and they would be tight like that. That's where the betrayal is coming from. This is not an acquaintance. And so this is where it gets crazy. This is where we have to start looking on a microscopic look a little bit. Do I sound different? Sorry. David's betrayer isn't some acquaintance or random guy. This is where it gets Jerry Springer crazy. Okay, it says in verse 14 that his betrayer was a guy who used to counsel him. And they walked in God's house together. They were tight. They would do life together. They were both Christian in an Old Testament sense. So it's not a non-Christian. That's what he's saying. This guy's a Christian. I trusted you. I shared some deep things with you, and you betrayed me. That's what he's saying. And then what we have to understand is that historically then, 2 Samuel chapter 15 and 16, it gives these really crazy narratives about David's life. There's a guy named Absalom. If you're taking notes, you should write that down. Absalom. If you know your Old Testament history a little bit, you know King David's family a little bit, you might know who Absalom is. Absalom got together with a guy named Ahithophel. I didn't make that up. It's biblical name, Ahithophel. And what they did is they conspired together and they made a plan to overthrow King David. Right? Because that's the problem being on top, right? Once you're on top, everyone wants to get at you. You can't just enjoy being on top. You have to fight. You got to battle. You got to protect. You got to do everything you can. And so Absalom and Ahithophel are getting together and they're conspiring. And when I say conspiring, I don't mean going on Facebook and saying a few mean words about King David. These guys knew what they were doing. They got an entire army together to go against King David. Remember in Psalm 27 when King David would say, an army is encamped against me? You think he's being figurative? That's literal. When in other parts in the Psalms, when he's like, my life is threatened, that's literal. And when I say that these guys conspired against King David and created this whole army, I'm not talking about a few buff guys, like 6 Eddies, like mafia style, get off the kingship or I'm going to break your knees, bro. We're talking 12,000 men. 12,000 men. It's almost like respectful because we can't take a few guys to overthrow King David. We need an entire army because this guy is legit and he's powerful. So they got 12,000 men to go against him. Now, do you know who Absalom is? That is King David's son. Do you know who Ahithophel is? That's the guy he's talking about when they would take sweet counsel together in God's house. David's friend and his very own son, his third son to be specific, they went out to betray him. Can you imagine betraying your own father because of power? And this comes up again in Psalm 41. King David writes, "Even my close friend, in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me." And commentators are right, this foreshadows Judas and Jesus at the Last Supper, like crazy. Now, I don't want to say bad words, but that's effed up, right? This is just jacked up. So when King David talks about betrayal, he's not talking about some ambiguous, random betrayal out there. He's talking about his own experience, his own seed, his own son would rise up and try to take his power. Now, what I want you to see next is how David responds to his betrayal. I want you to see that there is a process. And you could be even asking yourself, does he fight? Does he flight? Where in the spectrum is that? So first, David cries out to God. I want you to see that. In every psalm that we've come across, there's always a process, and I want you to embrace that, church. There's a process in every season of life. And there are honest statements and honest thoughts and honest emotions. Why? Because it's like a personal journal. I think some of us are really jiving with the Psalms. Some of the personalities that I know in this room, you're naturally emotive. King David to you maybe is like the spiritual hero. Like you just get him. You read the Psalms, right? You don't need Bible dictionaries or commentaries. Like you just get him. Like you just, that emotional world, like you just get him. And I'm not going to say you should steer away from emotion, but for you it's more about steering your emotions back to truth. If you're the emotive type and you start grounding yourself with good, sound doctrine and biblical truth, your emotions explode in such a true way and you connect with God. But for the rest of us, the Psalms are hard. And what I mean is, maybe you're the type that has a hard time journaling. And I get that. It's not just a discipline thing, like you just don't get journaling. It's just hard for you. And it's because you don't like taking the time to be honest with yourself. You just don't like that process. Like you just don't see the point of emotions. Just get to the solution. Get to the point. Everything is just this mathematical problem. If I could just figure it out, then I can get to my solution. Why complain? Complaining does nothing. I get your point. I really do. I think in large part I'm a type A personality. I'm task-driven. Okay, I have to resist the temptation to showing up to community group leader meetings and ministry leaders meetings and make everything business. I have to resist that. And I got to remember, I'm a pastor. I'm supposed to care about these people. Oh yeah, right? I have to remind myself of that. At the same time, you can't ignore that 90% of the Psalms is complaining and crying. Most of the Psalms, it's just these guys like King David just being honest with his thoughts and emotions. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's just emotions and it's thoughts. You can't ignore that it's in the Bible. It's inspired by the Spirit, through God, for these emotions and thoughts to be in the Bible. And so I really have to think, I really think that for some of you, the biggest takeaway from our entire series in Psalms is that it's just, you have to be emotionally honest. I think that for some of you, that has to be the biggest takeaway. Through all the seasons of your life, what is going on with me emotionally? I think some of you really need to process that. I think some of you don't like small group because you actually have to share something real. And some of these answers are just not flying anymore. How are you doing? How can I pray for you? Good? And that's the extent of it. I think some of us, you would rather write a 20-page paper on the Holy Trinity than to share 10 minutes of real talk in your life. And so look at verses 1 to 11. Just look at those verses. What's David doing? 11 verses in Psalm 45. He's complaining. He's small grouping. He's crying out to God. He's openly journaling. He's blogging his thoughts. Verse 1, he says, "Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not yourself from my plea for mercy. Attend to me, answer me. I am restless in my complaint, and I moan because of the noise of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked. For they drop trouble upon me, and in anger they bear grudge against me." So David says he's restless, right? He can't find peace. He says, "I'm restless in my complaint, and I moan." We discourage the complaining in the church, right? I've said it in my sermons, don't complain about the church. Who do you think you are complaining? Blah, 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 blah. That's what King David is doing. Verse 4, okay, bear with me. "My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fear and trembling come upon me, and horror overwhelms me. And I say, oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. Yes, I would wander far away." What do we call that? Flight. He wants to run away. He just wants to walk away from the entire situation. He doesn't want to make reconciliation. He doesn't want to confront. He doesn't want a small group. He doesn't want to do any of that like a dove. I just want to fly away. "I would lodge in the wilderness." I think some of you honestly would rather do that. You just want to get a cabin in the middle of nowhere and just be solo and not be hurt. "I would rather hurry to find a shelter from the raging wind and tempest." So here's my point. A quick observation here, okay? In these verses alone, there is no truth. Do you understand that? There's no like hardcore theology or doctrine going on here. You know, there's none of this didactic language about pursuing holiness. There's no, teaching on the Trinity. God is holy. Hero Israel, God, our hero Israel, the Lord our God, our Lord is one. There's no law. There's no teaching here. It's just verse after verse of raw emotions and thoughts. That's what I want you to see from this. And so here's my point. Do you think that you're too mature to share your honest thoughts and feelings? That you, out of all the Christians in the world, you have reached this point where for you it's pointless to share? And don't tell me what you think. Tell me what you do. Don't theologize. Tell me what you actually do. And if you don't think that sharing is important, then explain the very nature of the Psalms to me. Why is it in the Bible? If sharing isn't important, then why is it an entire book dedicated to thoughts and feelings? And if you're too mature to share, then explain to me Jesus' prayer at Gethsemane. There you go, I win, right? You can't top that. Explain to me Jesus' prayer at Gethsemane. He is not teaching a truth. He is crying out to God. Nobody is too mature to complain. Not complaining to God is not depending on God. Now, the point isn't that complaining and being emotional is the all-in goal. That's not the point. The point is complaining is part of the process. If someone betrayed you and you're hurt, be hurt. If someone betrayed you and you're angry, be angry. If you're confused, be confused. Because then you can move forward in the process. You can actually start taking steps to depend on God instead of you saying, I got to fix this myself. It's this process of depending on God. You cry out to God and saying, I know this is stupid, God, but this is how I feel. And that's your way of inviting God to step into your life, to intervene, and start showing you what grace is. Verse 16, David says, but I call to who? God. So if you're going to be honest with yourself, fill in the blank. When I feel betrayed, I call out to, what is it? That's when you start identifying who you're not trusting besides God. David says, I call out to God, and the Lord will save me. Evening and morning and at noon, I utter my complaint and moan, and he hears my voice. So, if you're thinking that there is no point to this process, then my challenge to you is to understand that you are the point. in this process of crying out, you are the point. So what do I mean by that? Second thing David does is he prays for his own redemption. Verse 18, he says, he redeems my soul in safety from the battle that I wage, for many are arrayed against me. He says, he redeems my soul in safety. So isn't it a little bit weird that he doesn't really pray, or he does later pray about other people, but he's saying, redeem me. 11 verses, he's going about, going off praying and crying out to God and complaining to God. And then he says, I need you to redeem me. It's a very interesting prayer. And I think when you unpack this, you're going to realize how uncomfortable this is. Because if you're the victim of betrayal, why do you need redemption? It's kind of funny how it works that way. Like, don't you want to be victimized, and don't you want to receive mercy and grace, and you're the one that's being attended to? But he says, redeem me. I think one of the worst forms of betrayal is marital unfaithfulness. And maybe a lot of us haven't really thought about that because none of us in here is married yet. And I don't mean to touch, soft nerve. If your parents have separated or divorced, then you kind of know secondhand what that's like. But when a man finds out that his wife cheated on him, then she becomes the worst person in the world. And when the wife finds out that her husband cheated on her, then he becomes the worst man in the world. Now, I'm not speaking on every single, marital unfaithfulness in the history of the world, but for the most part, especially for Christians, cheating almost never just happens. You understand that? There's always steps. There's always a progression. It always starts with something. You don't just go out and cheat on your spouse. It doesn't work that way. In marriage, there's no such thing as a one-way street. In a covenant relationship, it's a two-way street. You share everything. And some of us in here, when you eventually get married, you're going to find out the hard way how true that is. Okay? There is no such thing as my. And everything just becomes our. And I still have to learn that too. Right? I don't even like, when we go on vacation, I don't even like sharing a bed with my homie. You know what I'm saying? When we sleep. I'd rather just be uncomfortable sleep in the bathtub. Like, I don't like sharing anything. But in a marriage, in a covenant marriage, everything is two-way. And so you share a bed, you share a home, you share a TV, you share a child, for goodness sake. A living thing that's going to start running around and depending on you for everything. So you can't go, okay, little Johnny is yours for the next 2 days. Okay, I'll get him on Thursday. Like, little Johnny's is yours, always. Both of you have to take care of him together. And so you come home from work, you had a really stressful day, and you're sitting down with your boo across dinner, and you're saying, man, all this stuff is happening at work. I don't think I can handle it, right? What kind of wife would be like, sucks for you, A wife would be like, hey, you'll get through this. We're going to get through this. Your stress is my stress. Your defeat is my defeat. Your win is my win. We'll get through this. I got your back. You got a crazy day at work? I'm here. I'll be here when you get here. Two-way street. You share everything. So here's what I'm trying to say. When you're standing at the altar with an ordained minister in the presence of a holy God, with the witness of the entire congregation, and you say, I do. Even if there's marriage anxiety, even if you have cold feet, you still say, I do, because you are committed to this person and you love this person. From that, how does marital unfaithfulness just happen? It doesn't just happen. You see, hear me out. If your spouse cheats on you, it's not your fault, but you cannot wipe your hands clean. Everything is a two-way street. If you are the one betrayed against, there's a sting. It hurts and it sucks. But you have to start asking the question, why? You have to start being honest with yourself and say, how did I contribute to this? Maybe in the marriage, you were there, but you weren't really there. You weren't attentive enough. You were there, but you weren't really there, meaning you didn't give real attention. It has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do, with the house. It has everything to do with you. your spouse is going after someone else because you weren't there to meet that person's needs. And then you say, how dare you betray me and cheat on me? You see, both parties are involved. If you get cheated on, there's always a process. Now, in this broken world that we live in, we experience injustice and we experience betrayal and hurt and everything that comes with it. And sure, you'll admit that you're not perfect, but surely it cannot be your fault, right? You see, it's like this. I think when God looks at us and we're crying out, like, I'm betrayed, I'm hurt, it's like, you ever try to, like, stop two kids from fighting? They're, like, slapping each other, pushing each other around. You grab a hold of them. All you want to do is stop the fight. All you want to do is get to the bottom of it. You stop them. You have them both in your arms, and you're like, what's going on? Stop fighting. What's happening here? And the kid just looks at the other kid with just anger in his eyes. It's his fault. He started it. And the other kid goes, it's his fault. He started it. I think in front of God, that's just what we're doing. He started it. He's the betrayer. You know what Adam said to God after they bit the fruit? It's her fault. She's the one that bit the fruit. God, it's your fault. You're the one that gave me this flawed woman. Anyone but me. It's not my fault. Aren't we just a bunch of Adams walking around, betraying each other, hurting each other, and saying, he started it, she started it. My hands are clean. And so even in his betrayal, David's prayer starts with his own spiritual formation. That's what I want you to see. God, redeem me. It takes faith, it takes boldness, it takes humility to be able to honestly go before God and say, I'm hurt, I'm complaining, I'm groaning. It sucks and it hurts, God, but I need you to show me. I need you to form me. And so first, David cries out to God, and then second, he prays for his own formation, and then last, he prays for God's justice. In verse 23, he says, but you, O God, will cast them down into the pit of destruction. Men of blood and treachery shall not live out half their days. But I will trust in you. And that's how he ends the psalm. I will trust in you. And here's what's so radical about how he closes his prayer. There's nothing in this prayer that says anything about his own justice. It's easy to pray that God would bring justice to other people, but when it comes to your own justice, all we want is grace. Like, what's your prayer when you're about to take that final? You're teeter-tottering between two grades. You know what I'm saying? It's like the deepest. That's your psalm, right? It's right before you take your final. I'm in anguish, God. This is the time of grace, gospel, just Jesus, everything. You know, here I am to worship. You start busting out and worship. It's like, you know, all these prayers are coming out right before your final, right? And you're praying. You're not going to pray this. This is what you're not going to pray. God, give me what I deserve. Ooh, that's not what you're going to pray, right? My seminary's professors would pray that, and I'd be like, you idiot, why did you pray that? Now I'm going to fail, right? What is our prayer? Just now, God, if any, I need grace, not justice. That's how we are. Justice on everybody else, but when it comes to you, no, everything's about grace. You see, that's why it's a radical prayer. When you say at the end of your prayer, but I will trust in you, you better know what it is that you're praying. I will trust in you only if you give me grace in that? No, I will trust in you. And if I need to be betrayed in this, then so be it. If that person gets what he deserves, or if he doesn't, then so be it. I will trust in you. God's vengeance is very different from our own. That's why it's so radical. Now, if you sit and think about this psalm, and you're really trying to empathize with David, and you think about his context, maybe at first you're like, yeah, this really sucks. But then you think about David, and you start asking some questions, okay? Maybe you're going to go home, you're going to meditate on this, you're going to think about King David in his context, and you're going to start asking some questions like, isn't this the same David that committed adultery with Bathsheba? Remember that? Isn't this the same David that went out and murdered Bathsheba's husband? And so what is he doing talking about betrayal? He's the betrayer. You know that psalm? This is Psalm 55. You know where the psalm is? Where he's crying about Bathsheba and his sin? That's Psalm 51. That's only four psalms before this. So this is King David doing that. And so what I want you to take from this psalm is that this provides for us a process. Listen to this, church. It's a process from an imperfect man. It's not the source. The Psalms are inspired by Scripture. We need to pay attention to them. It teaches us and instructs us, but it's not the source. There's a greater and complete source that we see in Jesus Christ. Some of you are waiting for that, huh? Some of you are like, I know he's going to talk about Jesus. I don't know how, I don't know when, but he will. Turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 26. You want to talk about betrayal? Let's look at betrayal. Matthew chapter 26, and go to verse 20. When it was evening, he reclined at table with the 12. What's going on here? This is the Last Supper. And as they were eating, he said, truly I say to you, one of you will betray me. And they were very sorrowful and began to say to him one after another, is it I, Lord? He answered, he who has dipped his hand in the dish with me will betray me. Who's he talking about? Judas. Okay? There's a reason I want you to look at this text, okay? He's calling out Judas, basically, and Judas is about to betray him for just a few silver coins. Stay in the same chapter, go to verse 33. Peter answered him, though they fall away because of you, I will never fail away. Jesus said to him, truly I tell you, this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all the disciples said the same. This is betrayal number 2. Stay in the same chapter, go to verse 26, or verse 40. Chapter 26, verse 40. And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, so could you not watch with me 1 hour? 1 hour. Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, sleep and take your rest later on. In this chapter alone, we see the betrayal of Jesus 3 times. 3 times in the same chapter. You see, I'm going to wrap up all our Psalms with this, okay? We say that we know the gospel. And in your minds, a lot of you, I know you're saying, I know he's going to talk about Jesus. I don't know how, I don't know when, but he is. We say we know the gospel. And some of us treat the gospel like it's some introductory class to church, and then you move on to advanced gospel. Some of us believe the gospel to the extent that it's just this thing we have to understand, and then I can start wrestling with my sins in a real way. And then I can start pursuing holiness. And then I can get deeper into Christianity. Church, the gospel is all we have. There is no graduating from the gospel. There is no growing out of the gospel. There is no such thing as advanced gospel. There is gospel, and there is gospel, and there is gospel. But what happens is, because of our own spiritual laziness, because of our arrogance, we treat the gospel like it's some fast food item. We cheapen it. And what we do is, here is gospel and here's Christian living, and we detach ourselves from the gospel. That's what we do. But what I want you to see is, as you look at the gospel itself, you look at the narratives of Jesus, do you sympathize with Jesus? Is that what you're doing? Jesus was betrayed. Man, that sucks. Okay, how do I struggle with selfishness? His own disciple denied him 3 times. Wow, that sucks. Okay, I got to improve on my worship life now. You know what I'm saying? Like, we detach ourselves from that. What do you think we're supposed to see as we look at the life of Jesus? What do you think you're supposed to see when you see the Psalms of David, but then you look at the perfection of Jesus? What do you see? You look at David, you see this process, but it's flawed. It's deeply flawed. Adultery, murder, yeah, those are some serious issues of the heart. But you look at Jesus in the most intense betrayal, and what do we see? That's the life we're supposed to pursue. That is where we find freedom. That is where we find joy. We look at Jesus and we think, that is my new life. And so how do we apply the gospel then? You look at the gospel and you have to start making some decisions. If you walk away from the service thinking, I just have to deal with betrayal, nothing is going to happen. In other words, stop making these freaking excuses. That's what I'm saying. Stop talking about it and apply some real change in your life. Don't just hear the gospel and think, I know it. Now it's time to move on to real Christian. You completely missed it. In your own way, you're doing morality. In your own way, you're cheapening the gospel. In your own way, you're saying, I believe in the gospel, but I really don't. The gospel is all we have, church. That is all we have. And so when I preach the gospel, I'm not fulfilling some church requirement that I have to preach about Jesus. It's time to start actually looking at the life of Jesus, to look at Gethsemane, to look at the betrayal, to look at the cross, and say, that's what I need to pursue. I need to start making some real decisions. So how do we do that then, church? When you look at Gethsemane, you look at the betrayal, you look at the cross, this is what I see. Okay, there is Howard. That's me. And the gospel is being imprinted on my heart. So what do I do with that? Well, here's what the old Howard does. When the old Howard is betrayed, you know what he does? He passive-aggressively flights. And then over and over and over, right, because he's a pastor, he's just supposed to suck it up and be happy and preach the gospel until he starts harboring resentment. And still, it just becomes really hard to pray. That's what the old Howard does. What does the gospel do in renewing me into the life of victory of Jesus? I can't do that. I can't run away. I can't fly. I have to start dealing with this. How do I then approach someone who has betrayed me, who has hurt me in a healthy, gospel-centered, loving way? I got to get sting. I got to get that technical foul. I got to get hurt a little bit. But that's what God desires. He didn't go to Gethsemane. He didn't die on the cross so I can run away like a coward. Start making those kinds of decisions. That's how gospel is applied to your life. That's when you look at the Psalms, go through the process of spiritual formation. Stop making excuses. Stop saying, I know, when you really don't. When you look at the Gospels, you see, here's my point. They help us, they equip us, and they empower us. So that when you're betrayed and when someone someone you love hurts you, it's not fight, it's not flight, it's forgiveness. When someone hurts you and someone betrays you, it's not fight, it's flight, it's moving forward in your faith. It's not creating an island of yourself so that you put up all these mechanisms, safety mechanisms so you don't get hurt, but it's getting hurt again so that there is moving forward in your sanctification. Don't wait around to be changed. That's really the point of the entire Psalms. Don't passively wait and say, God will change me, God will change me. Take a hold of the beauty of the gospel and its power and start allowing it to work in your life. If you have to take baby steps, for goodness sake, just take baby steps. Allow the Psalms to help you take a hold of the gospel today and start allowing it to work in your life. I mean, aren't you tired of being emotionally and spiritually constipated and stuck and doing the same thing over and over again? That's what the Psalms are for. They help us move forward in that. Say amen if you believe in the gospel. Let's do this, church. Let's apply the gospel. Pray with me.